My name is David Cameron, and I was born in Miller, Missouri in 1972. Grew up in the Southwest Missouri area. So, how I ended up in Siloam Springs was I was working for the federal government on a Superfund site back in the late 1990s, and my mother-in-law lived in Bella Vista. Found an article in the local paper about needing a wastewater superintendent, and Siloam Springs, Arkansas. I didn't even know how to pronounce Siloam Springs, let alone had I even been to Arkansas. When I came to town, that's how I met with some folks and interviewed for the wastewater superintendent job, and that's how I ended up in Siloam Springs. My impressions of Siloam Springs when I arrived was it was a quaint little community, had some family-owned industries that were very invested in the community. I was always impressed with the board of directors. They were very involved, and I hadn't really seen a community function like that. I hadn't been around it a lot. And so to watch them get very active about buying land for soccer complexes and caring about the community, obviously having a creek, Sager Creek, that runs right through the middle of it, made it extremely unique. But just people that worked together, but it was a real tight-knit, family-oriented, so it was a great place to raise a family too, and they cared about your family. So as an employee, I wasn't just an employee. Taking care of my family meant something to them as well. And so that was a lot about what drew me to and enjoyed the early impression. But I also recognized early on that politics and local politics and small town politics could influence the day-to-day function of the city.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, when you have like businesses in town that are affected by water rates, or you see members of the community that those businesses that affects it, you could see like, hey, if you changed the water rate and it affected the businesses, you started to realize, hey, wait a minute, these are your largest employers, and you needed to learn to work with them versus like it's not just as easy as, hey, we got to raise rates. That actually impacts the local economy and their business model and stuff you never think about. You're like, well, that's just what we got to do. And you're like, wait a minute, you might want to consider that affects that business, that gets in the political arena, and start saying, hey, listen, you don't make those decisions just based off what you think is the right thing to do. You got to consider the bigger picture. And that's where I really learn what the impact was to businesses from the government. And I had no idea that when I started here. I just thought it was as simple as you raise a rate and fix it. But that has impacts on people and even businesses as well. So when I got here, I arrived at Siloam Springs in 1999, and the environment was they were trying to upgrade their wastewater treatment plant. It was very antiquated. I think it had been built in the early 80s. It was not built to address phosphorus by any stretch of the imagination. And there was not a lot of talk of water quality per se whenever I arrived in Siloam Springs, but it quickly began to escalate with the lawsuit in the poultry industry between Arkansas and Oklahoma. The lawsuit in Oklahoma was about primarily with the poultry industries, and I believe that the judge just ruled on that like in the last year. The ruling finally came out of that lawsuit. But it was really over Lake Tenkiller and the watershed, the Uchi-Spavinal watershed that runs into Oklahoma, part of Oklahoma's water supply. And so you have all the major cities. You had Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, a part of Bentonville, and Siloam Springs. All of our wastewater discharges into the state of Oklahoma. And so, but also at the same time, that lawsuit involved poultry litter or non-point source pollution that was getting into the stream. They had obviously went after the poultry industry as saying that's the major contributor that was in the lawsuit, but also the wastewater plants played a part of that contribution as well. And I believed it did play a part of the contribution. So the wastewater plant is about 500 yards from the west of or east of the Oklahoma state line. So Siloam Springs has the closest discharge to the Oklahoma watershed than any of the 5 cities. And so it started, I want to say we started construction on that facility in 2012 and it was completed in 2013, but we did about a $25 million upgrade to an existing facility that included biological treatment that could reduce phosphorus to meet the new numbers that were agreed upon between Arkansas and Oklahoma and us communities as well. Siloam Springs raw water intake, where they get their drinking water, is pumped out of Oklahoma into Siloam Springs and treated in Siloam Springs and then distributed to its citizens. So yeah, all the runoff that's coming out of northwest Arkansas, say Springdale, Bentonville, Fayetteville, Rogers, that is the water supply for the city of Siloam Springs. Because what happened, this goes back to the early 90s, late 90s, mid 90s, that the city had agreed to an agreement at the Illinois River Basin that they were entitled to 66% of the water rights that flowed by that pipe. So Siloam Springs to this day has 66% of the water rights of the water volume inside the Illinois River, even on the Oklahoma side. There's plenty of water capacity, so there was no reason for the city of Siloam Springs to participate in the two-ton water district because they had a very robust supply of water already. I mean, the Illinois River was an ample supply of water to the citizens of Siloam Springs. There are times where you have trouble with floods, where the river gets muddy, but sometimes the muddier the water, the easier it is to treat. And so it makes it a little bit easier to settle out. So sometimes the best drinking water that you can produce is actually where it's a little bit muddier than versus coming down cleaner. Little fun fact you probably didn't know, but us water guys, that's kind of one thing. The dirtier it is, sometimes the better it is to treat. So how did I transition from wastewater to city management? I was went back to John Brown University, got an organizational management degree. Was not planning on necessarily being in a leadership position, but the opportunity presented itself, and the city was willing to send me back to school, and I went to learn how to run an organization versus wastewater. And so that landed me in City Hall, and about a year after I started, so that was in October of 2000. In October of 2002, I became the public works director, so I was in charge of the water, sewer, street, solid waste. And then in 2004, they appointed me as the city administrator. So obviously I demonstrated the ability to learn those departments. So I guess you could say how I went from the wastewater plant to City Hall was I learned how to, instead of learning how to treat water, I learned how to take care of people and treat them well. And so, and that's how I learned to run a city. Yeah, so some of the big projects that I worked on when I was the city administrator was the whitewater kayak park with the Walton Family Foundation and with Mr. Walton himself. It was a vision that he had for quite some time. He'd secured the property along the Illinois River that was not even really in the city. It's not even located in the city limits of Siloam Springs. So the complexities of that is, how do you police a piece of property that is not adjacent to your own, that's your local police, so it's outside the jurisdiction, it's in the county, but also how you would take over ownership and maintenance of that site. It was going to be, I mean, it was a great project that would bring the community together, that someone was willing to fund and bring it to the community. And I think it's been well utilized, even to the point they've even had to change the hours and the way they charge for parking and things of that nature. But it was a project that came together, but just through a partnership with us and Mr. Walton and the Walton Family Foundation, that really led to the second project that they're doing now on the Arkansas-Oklahoma state line. That is a much larger whitewater facility. I can give you the preliminary overview of it, because that was one of the projects that myself and Mr. Walton discussed early on when we walked the property when I was still administrator. It's a partnership between the foundation, and it was between now Arkansas and Oklahoma, with the GRDA is going to oversee that property, because the challenge was, and it always was, because the property's in Oklahoma, where do you have policing jurisdiction and oversight? So obviously, again, the city of Siloam Springs could help facilitate it, because it's in the old Lake Francis watershed. It belongs to the city, and so they begin to purchase the property. I presume, be the Walton Foundation on that project, purchase that property, but there still had to be a neighboring partnering community or state to participate on the project, because you had to have someone that was going to maintain it, just like it was with our own kayak park. So the Walton Family Foundation helped us secure the property, secure the project, but they didn't own it. So the city had to own it, and that's the situation on that. I think it's called the Woka Park. I'll say this, if I've ever met, talking about Jim Walton, he is the kindest, he does not want any attention, in fact, drawing attention by saying he was participating in the project, he probably wouldn't like it, but the truth of it is, the most down-to-earth person you'd see, that was very much in the detail. He loved the Illinois River. He took his boys floating down that river. He cares about it. He's very methodical about making sure that it was done the right way with compassion for how it, I mean, very meticulous about how it was done, but not in a difficult way, not demanding, very accommodating. We just worked very well together. I mean, I'll say this: in our when we walked down to the property on the Lake Francis watershed, it'd be one of those days like you're a little bit intimidated, like, oh my gosh, Jim's here. We're talking about this project. It was just like two old country kids walking through the weeds, and he did not want to take the. I remember a story, and I can tell this story. I called my staff to say, listen, I'm bringing a gentleman, and I didn't want to use his name because I didn't want anybody to know that who would be looking at the property, because you didn't want somebody to say, hey, listen, I saw so and so down there looking at it. But I'll never forget, I had him go down there to mow the trail so that we could park and walk down to the river's edge. And I'll never forget, he brought another gentleman with him that day, and I pulled over to the side, and he said, hey, David, would you let me out of the vehicle right here? Well, he'd grown up around it as a kid, and he already knew the area, and he went tromping off through the weeds and wanted to go climbing down kind of off the bluff to look at this area. And I'm like, I went through all this stuff. He didn't show up out there in no suit and tie. He showed up out there just to go walking around. He wanted to get his hands dirty. He wanted to go climb the rocks and see what he was going to be doing. He had a vision for what he wanted to get done. That's how I know who Jim is. I mean, it's not, he had a passion for it. He had an idea for it. I was just a facilitator to help him to see that it worked. But it was his vision. And he was like a kid in a candy store around water. He loves the outdoors. A lot of my work with the Walton Family Foundation was surrounding the trail system. And so the trail system around John Brown University, that was the very first trail system. I mean, the city of Siloam Springs already had trails around the community, but there was never a trail around the campus of John Brown University. And so I specifically recall just working with the Walton Family Foundation, where we partnered together, where the city crews built the trail. The Walton Family Foundation paid for all the materials, but that was the very first project that we ever partnered on with the foundation. That was even before the kayak park. They were all kind of working hand in hand. But the hand of the foundation that's been instrumental that I've seen has been the trail system in Northwest Arkansas and in Siloam Springs. They're very instrumental in a lot of that work, if not all of it. So what happens, I mean, to me, without the assistance of the Walton Family Foundation to participate in the projects, they're going to get put on the back burner, because those funds that you need, that you're going to be utilizing to pave, and you're taking away from local streets, you're not taking care of your other infrastructure. And so a lot of other things begin to deteriorate. So when you actually have a partner come along and say, hey, listen, we'll pay for this portion of it or this portion, but we want to see the local community also get involved. The one thing I loved about working with the foundation was, we'll participate, we'd like to participate, but we also want to see the local community participate. So just, hey, sticking your hand out, give us a handout. It was kind of like, hey, we'd like to partner together on something. And I think the more you could demonstrate that, the more that the foundation participated with you. Just like when you drive through Northwest Arkansas and see all these signs of wayfinding signage, I was part of that decision or the project whenever they were putting wayfinding signs up throughout Northwest Arkansas. And they approached Siloam Springs, all the cities, the Northwest Arkansas Council. They all worked with us and helped us participate in the project. And we didn't have budgets for it. We're like, hey, we got to come up with half the money. That's an expensive project. But I'll tell you what, when the foundation was putting up a large portion of the money, then the cities found it. We got these beautiful signs of all of Northwest Arkansas that just make it very, very unique. You don't find that very many places across the country. The wayfinding signs, one thing I love about the wayfinding signs, that was all a design that was pretty much established, I think, through the foundation with the help of the Northwest Arkansas Council. But it's one unique design everywhere you go. It'll say, the Crystal Bridges sign, and the sign to go to the airport, whether it's in Siloam Springs, in Gentry, Gravette, Prairie Grove, all the signs look pretty much the same design. And so you have one unique design. So if you're someone visiting from outside of Northwest Arkansas and you drive into Gravette, you're going to see the same type of design, point you to the same directions you can go. And see, to me, what I've always shared about what's unique about, now that I've left Northwest Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas was one large family, and they shared in it together. They didn't leave the little cities hanging out there like, hey, well, they don't have the money for their signs. They helped grab it. They helped Gentry. They helped all Decatur. Uh, you drive anywhere, you look at that, you'll just see these signs that show you to the downtown, show you to the airport, to Crystal Bridges, but they're all the same, no matter the size or the size of the community. And I just think that speaks to solidarity of Northwest Arkansas instead of calling it Fayetteville, Springdale, or Rogers. When people reference this area, they don't reference it necessarily as Fayetteville anymore. It's more about, or just Springdale or Rogers. It's Northwest Arkansas, and I think that brings camaraderie and unity throughout the region. I think they were genius in doing that. And I think the foundation and the family and Northwest Arkansas Council are pretty instrumental in that. Well, the Northwest Arkansas Council, in my mind, is the largest catalyst of Northwest Arkansas. I mean, it is not for what they bring in planning, consideration. From what I've seen, being an outsider that came in and someone that has also gone back and now working in a different region, what sets Northwest Arkansas apart is the Northwest Arkansas Council. And I'll tell you why and what that is because they worked on the big picture items that what I would say the local governments just couldn't figure out on their own. So they needed an airport in Northwest Arkansas. It was the Northwest Arkansas Council and their leadership that helped lead it. And it was the business leaders, Sam Walton, J.B. Hunt, you had the Tyson family. There might have been someone else, others involved in that initial group that made up the council, but they're like, we need to form something that's working on transportation, water. Water was a big part of the council's effort was to get water in the rural areas, and a lot of it came down to how do we get people to work, live, and play and stay in Northwest Arkansas? Because do we have a transportation system that'll get people in and out? Can we fly people in and out? And I think that had it not been for the Northwest Arkansas Council, I don't believe, I mean, even though you have massive businesses here, to sustain those businesses, you got to have employees. And will they live, work, play, and stay in Northwest Arkansas? And if it hadn't been for the work of the Northwest Arkansas Council, it could have been a much different story. And I don't think they get as much credit as they deserve. Specific stories I can tell you about the council was, I can name several, but the one that stands out to me the most was the wastewater issue in Oklahoma. We were all trying to figure out what did we need to do. The poultry lawsuit is taking place. You see that lines are being drawn in the sand, no pun intended, but it was like, it's getting kind of intense, and all of us cities were on the verge of building these new wastewater plants, and we needed to know how to build them. So we started each individual city was going to Washington, D.C. and asking EPA to leave us alone, like, hey, we need you to tell us what to do. We can't get no assistance. All 4 or 5 of us were flying to Washington, D.C. individually to try to make this all go away to help our individual cities. I mean, I work for Siloam Springs, right? So I need to be up there advocating for Siloam Springs. I'll never forget the day when the Northwest Arkansas Council and Mike Malone, I believe even Archie Schaefer might have been a part of those discussions too. We all met up in a room, and this is where Mayor Womack was the mayor of Rogers. All the 5 cities got together. It's kind of like just like all the 5 families, like if you're watching a movie. And the families all got together with their mayors, and I'm the only administrator in Northwest Arkansas. The rest of them are mayor forms of government. And we're sitting in there in the council in the chambers, and that's when I realized. And so they pulled together a meeting for us to go to Washington, D.C., and all these meetings we'd all done up there by ourselves got nowhere. But we were on the meeting that they pulled together with the council, with Mike Malone and their effort. I'll never forget it. We were on the White House campus. We made it to the White House campus, into that campus, to have our meetings about the Bella Vista bypass and the need for wastewater funding of that. And I'll still say to this day, and I'll take it to my grave, and I'm convinced that those meetings led to the consolidated effort of all those cities working together, showing solidarity when we went to Washington, D.C., is what helped lead to the eventual finality of getting all that project done. I'm not saying what we did that day, but it was the beginning of a solid movement to get that Bella Vista bypass done. But we had tried for months, years to get meetings, like going, this is going nowhere. And when all 5 cities got together, we went from being at the Capitol, that we were at the White House having meetings during the Obama administration. And I'll never forget looking out the window and sitting there seeing the basketball court where President Obama played basketball. I was just like, this is so surreal of what the power of us together with the council can do in Washington, D.C. That's a strength that not many people have. And so we needed to find some level of understanding so that we could make these financial commitments to these wastewater plants that we don't build them and 5 years later they're obsolete because of these new rules in Oklahoma or a different rule in Oklahoma. And so, but I didn't view that conversation in Oklahoma as adversarial. I believe there were certain parts of it that our wastewater plant for the Siloam was truly contributing a problem. So it was an agreement that was like, we need to do our part from the city of Siloam's perspective because our wastewater plant is causing some of those problems. And so we actually, in all the 5 cities, Fayetteville, Rogers, Springdale, Bentonville, we all made improvements to our wastewater treatment plants. I want to say it was like $300 million back then. And that was a massive investment to try to do our part, saying, hey, listen, it's not all poultry. These wastewater plants had some level of responsibility to upgrade them. And no one was denying that. They just didn't know how much they had to do it. So finding an agreement with Oklahoma and doing it in a way that was not adversarial, which was the objective. And I think we were very successful on the most part for doing that. So I know it's an ongoing discussion they're still dealing with today, but yeah, I believe we had a great settlement with them, at least from an understanding. I wouldn't call it a settlement. I would call it that we had an understanding and statement of joint principles that we were going to try to achieve these objectives within a certain amount of time. The flow without the cities in the Illinois River would be substantially lower, and I think that those my colleagues and friends on the Oklahoma side would agree that the low flow situations could be a concern. And if you took Fayetteville out of the equation, Springdale, yeah, it could have a significant impact or drought on that river during certain times. And I think that finding a way of a solution not to divert the water, because it could have been just as easy for those communities to have pumped their water to the Arkansas River watershed. It'd have been expensive. So just to clarify the position of Oklahoma when it came to the water quality side, the way the Clean Water Act states or is indicated is if a neighboring state has a water quality standard that is of a certain standard, then the neighboring state must meet or exceed that standard. So Oklahoma got a water quality standard established, as which they have a right to do, and it was based upon the science that they believe was correct. And so it was an expensive standard, but they had done the testing. Oklahoma State had done testing. University of Arkansas had done testing. There was arguments over the testing and methods of what that was. And either way, there was a standard established in another neighboring state, so we had to meet it. So the options were upgrade these wastewater plants, or let's pump our wastewater to the Arkansas River and avoid it at discharging it, just eliminate our discharges to Oklahoma altogether. And so those are considerations you have to consider when you're considering how much money that you're going to be investing in your wastewater system. And so you got to have, think about this. You're building a $50 million facility based upon something that can change in 5 years. So water quality standards, or your permits to discharge, they're only good for 5 years. So every 5 years they could say, you know what? I think I need you to change your water quality standard again. Well, you just spent $50 million to meet the last number. Now what are you going to do? So you had to have some level of assurance of what you were building would last 20 to 25 years. So it was either option A was to build a plant and guess and hope the water quality standards don't change, or B, remove the guess and pump it over the hill. And it was more, so I would say what cooler heads prevailed and we didn't pump it over the hill. And that's what, was like, let's go address what's a reasonable water quality standard and let's build our wastewater plants to address it. And that's what we did. Some of the other projects that I worked on that were, that I would consider were very large scale. Probably my favorite project outside of working and negotiating the wastewater plant would be the sale of the city municipally owned hospital and the construction of a new facility as a result of that. So the facility had been built in 1955 and running a healthcare facility that was kind of needed upgrades. So we had two things going at the same time. We had a wastewater issue. We had to build this plant, or do we build a new hospital? Well, we knew we had to take care of the wastewater plant, but the hospital needed upgrades. Consideration was early was to consider a sales tax of the community. Would they tax themselves to build a new hospital? So early in my tenure as administrator, seeing that, I began to work with buyers and ask them consideration would they buy our hospital. And so in those discussions, it just kind of began to evolve. And whereas like, would you buy it on top of that, run what you've got, and then build us a new facility? And so in return, the city of Siloam Springs, which was probably by far the most difficult negotiation I've ever done. I wasn't leaving Nashville without a deal, and we worked on it for several days, a whole lot of attorneys in a room, and executed an agreement that sold the facility to Community Health Systems out of Nashville, with the agreement that within 2 years they would build a new, I think it was like it had a certain amount of bed number to it, full service hospital here in Siloam Springs. And as a result, the city got over $12 million out of their old hospital, got out of the hospital business. You know, healthcare and government. Could you imagine in today's society with a locally owned hospital by a city? Not saying the city couldn't have done it, but that was a major pivotal moment for the city because it freed up capital positions and cash positions that allowed us to do other things, which is what paid for building the library. And so they named it Memorial Park because that was the Siloam Springs Memorial Hospital that was on that campus of where the library and that Memorial Park are today. So that is the same campus where the municipally owned hospital was at. Now, if you ask me about the library project itself, I have a joke with that because those that will remember whenever I was the administrator, I was adamantly opposed to building a library with those funds because there was other needs such as public safety, police, and fire that I believe those funds needed to go to. So it wasn't that I'm anti-libraries. I was like building a $6 million library with the proceeds of the hospital felt like a rush to spend money. I was like, there are other projects that we need to fund in the city, but that's what an elected body is. That's what an elected body is for. It's not necessarily for me to make that decision, but I felt like I'd worked hard to negotiate that sale. So the library is a real funny point for those that know. During my tenure, I was really always hard-nosed about getting that project done. But I'm glad to drive by and see the Memorial Park to this day because they utilize those funds on the park very, very well. How the revitalization of downtown really took place started with a little coffee shop called Cafe on Broadway. And it's the first coffee shop on the corner. They were the very first people to take up. I mean, there were other people that had businesses. I don't want to take away from those that had maybe a barber shop or something that was going on. But the old post office is downtown. But when they built the new post office, it really left downtown fairly vacant. I want to say it was a 5% occupancy rate in the downtown area. 5%, yeah. Not many people were actually doing business in the downtown. I remember a place you could eat breakfast and just a few other, an old appliance store, but not much else. And well, there's a law office down. I'm sorry, but what happened was there was a group called Main Street, and Main Street Siloam Springs, and Ron Drake, who unfortunately is deceased. He was a contractor that helped revitalize old buildings and kind of had a vision for making downtowns a little bit nicer. And so he just kind of started helping these people with their construction on the buildings. And one by one, they just started kind of popping up, and you would see, wow, there's now another business down there. Well, there's another business. And then probably the big catalyst of the big catalyst of the project had to be when Todd Simmons and then Shelley Simmons were working on a project called, they bought it's called 28 Springs today, but it's a restaurant. But that project was kind of really the solidifying piece that there was a large scale investment getting ready to take place in the downtown area. And so it created a dining place in the downtown that was higher end and nicer, and they really made it into an event space. Then you start having, they always had light up Siloam Springs where they had the Christmas parade and things of that nature. But it went from 5% occupancy to 95% occupancy. People started buying the properties. There was almost like a buzz. You wanted to be in the downtown. And the biggest part that the city played in that, I give, and why I mentioned those names first, they were the catalyst providers. Those people, they drove the vision. They made it work. They didn't just come to government saying, government, you need to take care of your downtown. They put skin in the game first. And when they did that, then all of a sudden, like, listen, they had low water pressures. They couldn't meet fire codes. They couldn't meet certain things. So as a city administrator coming from the public works side, I knew infrastructure. I'm like, well, listen. So we started changing out electrical transformers, started changing out water systems, made improvements to the sidewalks, the street, and just started getting involved with the beautification of it to like, let's go for the ride on this thing, and let's start getting excited with them and do the things that we own and fix them. And really, it really took off and became a beautiful project. And now Siloam Springs downtown, when I look at it, but it's incredible. But I really do have to credit the vision of Ron Drake, the late Ron Drake, for really spearheading that effort. Another project I worked on would be the Sacred Creek revitalization, and it had struggled for a long time with appearance, with looks. It just looked absolutely awful in the summer, just full of algae. So you got this beautiful stream that runs right through the middle of town, and it just would cake up with just this awful looking algae bloom. And so one of my favorite projects that we were able to do was to remove the low water bridge that was in town. It's, if you go down there, there's a low water bridge, and it used to hold the water. It would just be like it would create like a lake almost. That would, instead of a stream, it would look like more like a river that was holding water, but it would just get absolutely nasty. And when I got to town, they're like, David, as a water guy, could you do something to fix that, make it look cleaner? I'm like, and what we did is we restored it back to a creek versus trying to be a holding pond. And so the water flows through town now as it should, and it actually helps it. And it looks a lot better. I know there'll be people that says it needs to look a little bit better, but I'll tell you what, asking a water person with a background in it, it's in its most natural state doing what it's naturally supposed to do. And that's one of my favorite projects I did, because not everyone was happy, but it was the right thing to do. But some of the other projects that I did while I was here that I'm very proud of are more employee related. I mean, we got the public safety sales tax adopted to pay for the new police station. I mean, they got new equipment in the fire department, but really I was a wastewater operator that came from the employees. I was an employee first kind of guy. So I hate to say this, but I considered myself the little guy, the overlooked guy. And so I really did care a lot for my employees. I still do. And why I'm back here today doing a story for Siloam Springs is because I love this community and those employees that help serve with me, alongside me. That's what I do it for. I'm probably the most proud of those people. So I left on December 31st, 2014, and I am now the city administrator in Republic, Missouri, but I've also started a consulting firm where I do consulting to help local communities as well, because I learned a lot out of Siloam Springs. I learned a lot in Republic, but I started in Republic. I just celebrated 7 years with the city of Republic, Missouri. But that's where, I mean, I grew up in that region, so I got to go home a little bit, but I still come home and call the hogs. Yeah, so I can tell you a lot of the leaders on the council. I can tell you a lot of the leaders in the community whenever I was here. So you actually had Jonathan Barnett was not on the city council or the board of directors, but he was a state representative. He was also a highway commissioner and was very instrumental in the region for the 4-lane going to Gentry. That was a 2-lane road for as long as I can remember. Jonathan was ultimately responsible for that. And while it was very controversial, the whole divided highway going through the middle of Siloam that added that extra lane to make it 3 lanes, that was the effort that Jonathan pulled together, because there was supposed to be a bypass around Siloam Springs. I mean, there was a major uproar over it. But Jonathan still got the funding to do that. One of the biggest projects we got done working with Jonathan and the Highway Commission was the railroad overpass that goes down on Sherry Whitlock Drive. That used to be a railroad crossing going to the new high school and the hospital, and so there's about a $12 million overpass was there. Obviously, Chip Pollard, Dr. Pollard out at JBU, incredible community leader. That campus is absolutely, when I was here, you had Bill George Arena, the Science Center. I mean, you had the Simmons Hall. The work, I'm not even doing it justice with all the work that they've been able to do out at John Brown University under Dr. Pollard. He did a fantastic, he's a fantastic community leader. Obviously, Moose Van Pook, the late Moose Van Pook, was the mayor of this community. Dear friend, and I mean, he was my mentor. And so, but he could control and run a city council or board meeting like nobody I've ever seen. One thing about Moose was so hilarious. There was never a cheek of a lady he did not kiss. He just never could get away from it. You show up to somebody and he'd always just kiss them on the cheek. And I was like, that would never fly today. But so Moose was like always just kind of like just an incredible community leader. And he could run a council meeting like there's no tomorrow. Obviously, you look at Mark Long, you had David Allen, the late Mike Kinney. He was an instrumental city council member, also a state representative in our area. He did a masterful job. Mark Latham, he was my predecessor as the city administrator. He was a big time community leader. Mark Simmons, he was big on the Northwest Arkansas Council in the region. So those are just some of the people that I can think of that were, and the late Pete Allen was a big contributor to the school district and some of the projects we did. So, yeah. I'd say Siloam Springs is a community as unique as its name. That's what I'd say. It's a unique community as unique as its name. Because people call it Siloam, Siloam, and it's a community as unique as its name. I heard that when I was here, and we never coined the phrase, but that's what I'd tell you. It's a place where you can go raise a family. It's a place where it's safe. It's clean. I mean, it's not highly political. It's just a place that's got a strong family value system, but it's truly as unique as its name. It's a natural. Yeah, because when you look at it, that's what I love about Sager Creek. It should have been restored to its natural state, not something that's modified. So I'm proud of that, but it's a natural. It's naturally there. It flows out of the golf course. A lot of people don't know that Sager Creek starts out of out of the ground, comes out of the local municipal golf course, and that's what creates Sager Creek flowing through there. So it's a natural. It's naturally established. Benton County is a place where you could work together. People wanted to work together. There was pride. There is a lot of pride in this state. As Sam Pittman always says, I love it. He says it's a proud damn state. It is 100%. I'd say that about Benton County. I'd say that about Northwest Arkansas. People are extremely proud of where they live. And they work, and because they're proud of where they live, that's what I'd say to somebody. Because of that pride, they work hard to maintain and sustain it. They're not sitting there just taking up space. They're very invested into their area because there's a pride in that area. And it's just, one thing I can tell you when I lived here, and I still have it to this day, I get goosebumps every time I cross the state line and I'm going to a Razorback game. There's just a pride when you enter Reynolds Razorback Stadium and there's just one Razorback that day. That's just awesome. My favorite thing about Benton County is the forward-thinking nature. Never slow down. I mean, if I was not, I mean, it's like they've always been progressive, to always challenge status quo. They've never got complacent. Now, I'm not talking about living there. I'm just talking about from a business leader's perspective. It's always forward-thinking. Because if you ask me my favorite thing about Steve Womack, it's full steam ahead.